Unlike the guild town, Riverton had avoided war. Hidden high in the hills behind the fortified guild's broad maze of fens, Riverton remained unseen. The inhabitants, not rich in money or possession, lived steadfast, quiet lives. Their simplicity was not the result of inability, but rather of choice, and the town had fallen outside the envy of those who elsewhere fought for the servitude of others. Having long ago secured independence, the inhabitants owned the land and the buildings they occupied. They tended the land and produced what they needed. When they wanted something from outside, they collectively secured it by offering something in return, and it would never be gold they offered. It would be something crafted in wood or in clay from the hills. The market bustled, but gently. Goods and produce were sold and exchanged without dispute or even negotiation. Cookery wares of clay, vegetables of brilliant color, mountain herbs, local cheeses and meats, worked wood. What was needed was supplied and no more, and the market at the end of the day was empty. A balance existed in Riverton. Excess and triviality were absent, but what the traveller observed was not an expression of sterile utility. The people took pride in simplicity, but not at the expense of beauty. The crafts were well worked, and while decoration was prevalent, it was never taken to irrelevance. Unstressed regularity was the rule. Business was done in the morning and afternoon, its sessions marked from the bell tower with precise little melodies, at sunrise, then at midday, then to signal return from a long lunchtime, and then finally again in the early evening. Whenever the shops and stores were closed, public houses were opened to serve food, sweet herbal infusions, local wine and beer. The people enjoyed company and health, and the absence of discord and infirmity. The traveller saw only one departure from the trend towards similitude. A relatively elderly man each day came to the square. His clothes, although of a fine quality, were threadbare. He wore a scowl as he moved around. There was an aggressiveness about his movement and look that was unlike the reserved energy that was otherwise uniform. But the traveller noted that even in his case, the appearance was insufficient to break the overall impression. The man's eyes sparkled beneath his furrowed brow. Even in him and in others' response to him, contentedness prevailed over disquiet. His fierceness was not a threat to them, and they were not threatened. They sensed in his eyes, like in theirs, a certain subtle innocence fundamentally held. The traveller wandered the streets, watching the transfer from night to day, from animal to man. He watched the sunrise. He watched as the town rubbed sleep from its eyes as it acknowledged the morning light. He watched the square fill with talk and laughter, how it crested at midday before the return to afternoon business. He listened for the evening bell and for the emergence of friends in the evening. He watched night descend. He saw the clearing of the streets as friends returned home for dinner and then re-emerged later as couples in moonlight for a stroll before bed. When they finally went home to stay, each passed a small piece of ownership back to the night, back to the nocturnal world of the animals that emerged to scavenge the quiet streets. Near the market square, the town straddled the river. On either bank, lawns had been nurtured, and the fronds of willow trees trailed in the water where children dived from bridges. The inhabitants had preserved the river, and swimming was a town-wide tradition. The traveller learned how the locals of all ages took their daily immersion. A common practice was to swim upstream from one bridge to another, and then to float down again with the current. Many swam year-round. Some preferred the briskness of morning, some invigorated their midday before their afternoon work, and some washed the day away before converging in groups on the banks with towels hanging from shoulders, glasses of beer in hand, to talk quietly as the last of the sunset faded from the sky. At the weekends, the townspeople took advantage of the surrounding countryside, walking through the fields, enjoying the views from hilltops. The river upstream and downstream offered more opportunities for swimming as the river pooled between fields and lazy meanders bordered by reeds shaded beneath leafy branches of the overhanging trees. Although they lacked intensity, the people were active. They were commercially competent but not driven, intellectually dynamic but not rapacious, physically robust but not competitive. They were protective of their world. They embraced foreigners but retained boundaries. They believed in autonomy, but only so far as the result was consistent with the way they had chosen. In this way, they had kept Riverton secure. The traveller reflected that this world, like his own, was one of freedom within tight parameters, but the townspeople unknowingly faced a predicament. Their warmth was what had given them their independence, but that same quality prevented them from seeing the threat they faced. So long as Riverton existed in the way it did, the people could hardly imagine their lives could ever be different. They had forgotten their ancestors had fought to achieve the anonymity they enjoyed. The townspeople retained anonymity through their lack of ambition and wealth. So long as the outside world was focused on wealth, the town had remained invisible. The traveller saw Riverton's anonymity would die. The tide rising outside this protected world would sweep through this town and smash it. The inhabitants knew their world, and they were invested in its longevity. They expected continuity. It was not to their discredit they could not see what was coming. Through no fault of their own, they had become innocents. The traveler could see this. He knew his world existed to protect the balance Riverton had found, to extinguish the wave that would destroy it.